Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're untangling how unprecedented 4-century-old genetic tracking finally brought closure to one of the most hauntingly cold mysteries in American history. It's a story that perfectly bridges old-fashioned, hit-the-pavement detective work with some truly cutting-edge science, proving that the truth, well, it has an incredibly long memory.
Let's kick things off with a staggering number: 47. That is exactly how many years a grieving husband and a deeply terrified community waited for a single answer. I mean, think about that. 47 years is long enough for a child born after the tragedy to grow up, become an adult, and have their own kids. And for nearly half a century, the killer was still living in the exact same county, just going about his normal life, aging year by year, while the victim's family was completely frozen in time.
District Attorney Heather Adams really hit the nail on the head here when she stated, "This case was solved thanks to advances in DNA technology. To be honest, without that, I don't know if we would have ever solved it." This isn't just a story about a horrific crime. It's a brilliant testament to how the relentless evolution of science can literally conquer time itself. Decades passed where the evidence just sat silently in a filing cabinet. But all the while, the technology was quietly catching up.
Part 1. A 1975 Lancaster murder. Let's set the scene. Back in 1975, Manor Township was one of those places where folks kinda rarely even locked their doors. The victim was Lindy Sue Biechler. She was a 19-year-old newlywed who worked at a local floral shop, known to everyone for her gentle smile and long hair. Lindy and her husband, Phil, were just starting out. They were simply building a life together in their quiet Spring Manor apartment when the absolute unimaginable happened, right inside their own home.
Now, I want you to look at how chillingly narrow this window of attack actually is. At 6:45 p.m., Lindy returned home carrying groceries. By 9 p.m., her aunt and uncle arrived to exchange recipes and discovered a horrific scene. This tight, roughly 2-hour timeline proves that the killer wasn't just some random passerby. He specifically knew Lindy's schedule. He knew exactly when she would be home alone, and he knew when her husband would be out. The sheer brutality of the crime scene was devastating. Lindy fought back with everything she had, suffering 19 stab wounds from 2 different knives. But investigators also noticed the attacker's cold, calculated actions. He intentionally wrapped a dish towel around the knife handle to conceal his fingerprints. He left behind just a single footprint in the kitchen and, crucially, a single sample of semen DNA on the victim's clothing. This DNA was the absolute only direct link to the killer. But here's the kicker. In 1975, nobody really knew what to do with it.
Which brings us to Part 2. Decades of dead ends.
Despite securing that critical DNA, investigators slammed right into the technological brick walls of the 1970s. 300, that's how many individuals were interviewed by the task force in the months and years following the murder. We're talking neighbors, coworkers, even customers at the floral shop. They packaged the sample perfectly, filed it away, and had to rely entirely on traditional police work. They formed task forces, brought in outside criminologists, chased every single rumor. The result? Absolutely zero viable leads.
Just look at this timeline. It is generation after generation of investigators trying to leverage that safely filed DNA. Fast forward to the 1990s, when DNA profiling finally enters the justice system. They run the sample through the National CODIS database, but zero matches. The killer simply wasn't in any criminal system. By 2019, they tried again, this time having Parabon Nanolabs create a composite facial profile of the suspect. They put it out to the public, really hoping for a tip. Again, nothing. The case was completely frozen solid.
Part 3. Tracing 4 centuries back. So by 2020, inspired by the whole Golden State Killer capture, the Cold Case Unit brings in renowned genetic genealogist C.C. Moore. And she quickly realizes she is facing the hardest challenge of her career. See, standard genetic genealogy usually finds DNA matches just 2 to 3 generations back, like cousins or uncles, which makes it relatively easy to build a family tree. But in Lindy's case, the closest matches in the database were incredibly distant. Moore had to invent an entirely new strategy, tracing matches back 300 to 400 years just to find a common ancestor.
And this is where it gets absolutely mind-blowing. Through months of painstaking work, Moore found that all the distant DNA matches pointed back to one single origin point, a small village in southern Italy called Gasparina, way back in the 17th century. From there, she basically had to trace the genetic link forward, following centuries of human migration, ship manifests, and census records, all the way to a very specific group of descendants living in Lancaster County today.
By narrowing down that specific genetic group by age and gender, the list shrank and shrank until it hit one man, David Sinopoli. And here's the most chilling part of the whole shebang. Sinopoli lived in the exact same 4-unit apartment building as Lindy and Phil in 1975. The killer wasn't some stranger passing through town. He was a neighbor. He was someone Lindy likely nodded to in the hallway. He had been hiding in plain sight with a perfectly clean criminal record for nearly half a century.
Part 4. The Coffee Cup Sting.
Okay, so with the prime suspect finally identified, police couldn't just knock on his door and ask for a DNA sample, right? That would blow their cover and risk him destroying evidence. They had to get creative. First, they set up quiet surveillance on Sinopoli's daily routines. Second, they patiently waited for an opportunity, which finally came on February 11, 2022, when he traveled to the Philadelphia International Airport. Third, they watched him drink a coffee and toss the cup into a public trash can. Detectives swooped in and immediately retrieved it. And finally, the lab confirmed a 1 in 10 trillion DNA match to the evidence from 1975. Boom. They had secured voluntary DNA that cemented his guilt without a shadow of a doubt.
Part 5. Justice after 47 years.
Armed with undeniable proof, on July 17, 2022, which is exactly 46 years, 7 months, and 12 days after the murder, authorities finally arrested David Sinopoli. Assistant District Attorney Christine Wilson reminded everyone in the courtroom that these cases are never forgotten. Lindy Sue will never be forgotten. And we really need to remember the human cost here. Phil Biechler had aged 47 years without his wife. He lived his entire adult life with an agonizing, unanswered question, just waiting for this exact moment of accountability.
Fast forward to October 2023. Sinopoli pleaded guilty to avoid a drawn-out trial. When prosecutors actually forced him to sit right beside a photograph of Lindy Sue Biechler in court, Sinopoli showed absolutely no reaction, no remorse, literally not a single facial muscle moved. He offered this brief, incredibly empty apology, but his chilling lack of human empathy left the family's most haunting question forever unanswered. Why? Why did he enter that apartment? We may honestly never know.
The judge sentenced him to 25 to 50 years in prison. Now, because the law requires sentencing based on the statutes from the era the crime was actually committed, this was the absolute maximum allowed under 1975 law. But for a 69-year-old man, this number effectively guarantees that David Sinopoli will spend the rest of his natural life behind bars.
Part 6. Practical Safety Takeaways.
So, we've seen how unprecedented science and incredibly dedicated police work solved this case. But Lindy's story also leaves us with some vital, everyday safety habits we should all take away. First, always lock your doors, even if your neighborhood feels completely safe. Second, maintain a healthy caution around neighbors, because sometimes the biggest threats are the people right next door. Third, clearly communicate your daily schedule to loved ones so they know exactly when to expect you. Fourth, never ever ignore your survival instincts if someone makes you uncomfortable. And finally, always remember that DNA evidence never lies, and it certainly never forgets.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you pondering this one thought. If biological evidence can patiently wait almost half a century for a genealogist to trace a 400-year-old family tree just to reveal a killer, how many other quote-unquote unsolvable cold cases are out there, just waiting for tomorrow's scientific breakthrough? Justice might be delayed by decades, but as we've seen today, time and technology are ultimately on the side of the truth.